In the past, Elizabeth had been one of Hollywood's top stars, but after turning 50, her beauty had gradually faded. She could only host a fitness segment on television. During a break, Elizabeth wanted to use the restroom, but the women's room was under repair, so she decided to go into the men's restroom. There, she heard her boss, Harvey, enter with an angry demeanor. He said that an old and washed-up actress like Elizabeth, who had no fame left, should be fired. He mocked her for thinking she was still in her youthful prime. Next, he announced he would replace her with a young girl. Harvey's cruel words cut deep into Elizabeth's heart. She looked in the mirror and saw her sagging skin. Although she was unwilling to accept it, there was nothing she could do. On her way home, she saw posters of herself being taken down. Distracted, she got into a car accident. Fortunately, she was not seriously injured. But even after escaping death, Elizabeth couldn't manage a smile. Aging made her feel that life was worse than death. At the hospital, a young male nurse stopped her. He pressed on her spine and told her she was a suitable candidate. Then he returned her clothes. She thought nothing of it, but the moment she left, she discovered something in her pocket. It was a piece of paper wrapped around a USB drive. On it were the words, "It changed my life." Just then, Elizabeth ran into her old classmate, Fred. Although they were both no longer young, Fred openly showed his affection. He even told her they should keep in touch. Later, in her empty apartment, Elizabeth's curiosity grew. She opened the USB drive. The video in it said that by injecting a drug called the substance, her cells would divide and create another version of herself, younger, more beautiful, more perfect. Elizabeth thought this was absurd. She turned and threw the USB into the trash. But human nature always succumbs to temptation. Even with the slightest chance, she was willing to take a gamble. She followed the address to a small alley. Behind a rolling door, a secret passage opened up. Elizabeth went inside and found a secret room. She used a number to open locker 503. In the first compartment of the box was a vial of activating serum for her exclusive use. It could only be used once. The second compartment was for the new self. The third compartment contained the exchange serum, which had to be used every 7 days to swap bodies. The last compartment held the nutrient solution necessary for survival. The warning clearly stated, "You are one." After a moment of internal struggle, Elizabeth undressed. She injected the activating serum into her body. As soon as it entered her, she felt dizzy and fainted. Her back began to writhe as if something was pushing out. Suddenly, her skin split open, her eyes doubled, and a human-shaped leg burst through her back. Soon, a young and gorgeous girl emerged. Her name was Sue. She had all of Elizabeth's memories, but her body had completely transformed. Looking at her stunning figure, Sue felt satisfied. She stitched up the wound on Elizabeth's back. Then, she began to infuse her with nutrients. Now, Sue had 7 days to live in this youthful body, but suddenly she felt dizzy. Blood started to trickle from her nose. She suddenly realized she had forgotten to inject the stabilizer. There were 7 vials in total, corresponding to the required daily dosage. In a hurry, she extracted the stabilizer from Elizabeth's back. Then, she injected it into her own body. Immediately, she felt refreshed and full of energy. Brimming with confidence, she went to the television station for an audition. Sue's beauty and charm immediately caught Harvey's attention. He signed a contract with her on the spot with plans to turn her into a superstar. Thanks to Elizabeth's memories, Sue's experience helped her rise quickly. She rapidly became the brightest new star at the television station. Every day, she injected a dose of stabilizer. In her free time, she also took care of Elizabeth. Soon, a week had passed. She had to swap back with Elizabeth. Although she was reluctant, she still used the exchange syringe. The blood of both began to be transferred back and forth between them. Suddenly, Sue fainted. Elizabeth opened her eyes once more. The pain in her back was unbearable, but looking at the unconscious, youthful version of herself, she felt everything she had done was worth it. When Elizabeth returned to the television station, Harvey had already packed her belongings. He couldn't wait to throw her out, joy written all over his face. In her aging body, Elizabeth no longer found excitement in anything. Every week, the supplier sent her a package, and just like that, Elizabeth drifted through a meaningless week. Then Sue began to take over. Her life was much more exciting than Elizabeth's, and she fully enjoyed her exclusive 7 days. But the sight of Elizabeth lying in the bathtub was too bothersome, so Sue smashed through the bathroom wall, trying to hide Elizabeth inside. The loud noise angered one of the neighbors. However, upon seeing the young and beautiful Sue open the door, his anger vanished instantly. He even said she could ask for help anytime. After that, Sue dragged Elizabeth into the cramped, dark cellar. She took down Elizabeth's portrait and replaced it with her own. With Harvey's full support, Sue's fame grew rapidly. On the 7th night after work, she invited a young man to her apartment, but the time for the swap had come. Her head throbbed with unbearable pain and blood poured from her nose. In a panic, she rushed to the cellar. By then, Elizabeth's supply of stabilizer was depleted, but greed pushed Sue to want more time. She broke the rules, drawing another dose of stabilizer from Elizabeth's body and injecting it into herself. After recovering, she decided to survive the night first. On the 8th day, when they completed the body exchange, Elizabeth stepped out of the cellar. She found the house in a chaotic state. Along with it was the young man's helmet and a note saying he would be back in a few days to retrieve it. But then, Elizabeth noticed something was wrong. One of her fingers looked lifeless. When she undressed and checked, she realized Sue had broken the rules, stealing extra stabilizer from her body the previous night. She immediately called the supplier to ask if there was any way to recover, but they told her that the other body had stolen her vitality and there was no cure. Furious, Elizabeth demanded why she should pay for Sue's mistakes, but they replied, "You are one. As long as the other body maintains the balance, this would never happen." However, when Elizabeth saw Sue shining on TV, even more radiant than she had been in her youth, jealousy burned in her heart. Later, when she went to pick up another package, she realized she was being followed. Her stalker turned out to be the same nurse who had initially recommended the substance, but he was no longer young. The older man revealed that he was the Matrix, while the young nurse was just his other body. He told Elizabeth that their only value now was to keep the other version alive, but the other body kept devouring their life force. Elizabeth was horrified. She quickly ran away. Unfortunately, she bumped into the young man who had once dated Sue. Faced with the old and faded Elizabeth, the man showed much less patience. This made Elizabeth's heart feel even more unbalanced. To comfort her lonely soul, she searched for the contact information of her old classmate, Fred. She wanted to try love again. They happily agreed on a meeting place. Elizabeth was full of hope. She dressed up beautifully, her confidence restored, ready to meet him. But the moment she saw Sue's youthful, flawless face, she felt unworthy in comparison. She reapplied her makeup several times, but Sue's image haunted her everywhere. No matter how hard she tried, she was never satisfied. In the end, she nearly drove herself to the brink of insanity. Her date with Fred was broken and abandoned. 7 more days passed. Elizabeth kept her promise and swapped with Sue. But during one of Sue's performances, an accident suddenly happened. Terrified, she discovered a large lump bulging on her hip. She quickly pressed it upward with her hand, and after much effort, she pushed the lump all the way to her navel. Then, she stuck her hand into her navel and started to dig. A few seconds later, she actually pulled something out, a piece of fried chicken. When she returned to the stage, she realized her show had already been canceled. Worried that she would be thrown out of the station again, Sue was very surprised when Harvey announced that the ratings for her show had skyrocketed. At this time, Sue would be hosting the New Year's Eve show. This news thrilled Sue, but it also made her greed even greater. Instead of following the 7-day rule, she drew an extra 3 days worth of stabilizer from Elizabeth. She didn't swap back until the 10th day. When Elizabeth finally woke up and saw her own appearance, she completely lost her mind. Her half-human, half-ghostly body left her unable to care for herself. Meanwhile, Sue, glamorous and radiant, had become the center of everyone's attention. The contrast between them was stark. In her show, Sue even mocked Elizabeth's old fitness program, calling it outdated. After all, they didn't belong to the same generation. This made Elizabeth furious. She was jealous that Sue had stolen her beauty. When they swapped again on the 7th day, Sue found the apartment in a complete mess. It was Elizabeth's way of showing her anger. By then, the hatred between them could no longer be resolved. In a rage, Sue drew dozens of tubes of stabilizer from Elizabeth's body. She lived freely for 3 months, but it still wasn't enough. 3 months later, when she tried to draw more, the stabilizer had turned dark and murky. It was no longer usable. Panic set in. She hurriedly called the supplier, asking if there was a solution, but it was irreversible. The only way was to swap back so Elizabeth could supply stabilizer again. Although unwilling, Sue had no other choice. She barely managed to revive Elizabeth with a tube of blood. But when Elizabeth woke up, her body was already completely decayed. She didn't want anyone to see her in that hideous state. She quickly locked Sue's boyfriend outside the door. Her heart was filled with despair and only rage remained inside her, dragging her ruined body into the living room. Elizabeth called the supplier again. She said she wanted to stop. They reminded her that once she stopped, there was no going back. but Elizabeth firmly replied that she wanted to end it. The next day, the termination kit arrived. Elizabeth wrapped herself tightly from head to toe. Her neighbor thought she was Sue, but instead a strange figure walked out. After retrieving the package, she hurried back and pulled Sue out of the cellar. She grabbed the termination serum and injected it into Sue's body. But just before finishing, she remembered her once glorious past that would disappear forever. She stopped in a rush, picked up the blood tube, and tried to wake Sue instead. Sue did wake up, but when she saw Elizabeth's horrifying state, she was terrified. On the ground lay the unfinished termination serum. Sue instantly realized Elizabeth had wanted to erase her. Even though they were one, they were still two different consciousnesses. At that moment, Sue completely snapped. With one sudden knee strike, she knocked Elizabeth across the room. The frail Elizabeth could not withstand the blow. She was soon beaten to death. But since they were one body, without Elizabeth's stability, Sue could not survive either. However, that night was the New Year's Eve show. No matter what happened, she wanted to die in glory, and yet while Sue was putting on her makeup, she started coughing. To her horror, a tooth popped out. Then a few more front teeth fell as well. Suddenly, she remembered the leftover activating serum at home. Since she was split from Elizabeth, maybe she could also create another other body, so she quickly fled the scene, not wanting anyone to see her in that condition. At home, she injected the very first activating serum into her body. Moments later, she collapsed unconscious. At that moment, she turned from Elizabeth's other body into the new Matrix. But what she didn't expect was that her newly formed other body was grotesque. She had forgotten the activating serum could only be used once. This time, the body that emerged was a fusion of both Sue and Elizabeth, dominated by Elizabeth's essence. Still, she thought about attending the grand show. She dressed herself again in a gown, put on earrings, combed her few thin strands of hair, and even pasted Elizabeth's portrait onto her face. Then, she returned to the stage. Everyone thought Sue was planning a surprise for them. As the audience watched with eager anticipation, a monster appeared on stage instead. The sight completely stunned the crowd. Those sitting in the front row were left with lasting psychological scars. Amid their horror, she suddenly exploded on the spot, leaving behind nothing but flesh and blood. Elizabeth could have enjoyed her twilight years peacefully, but because of greed and vanity, she walked straight into destruction. Thank you for watching.